Hi, Philip.
I mean,
Thank you for coming to our Daha Yaxshi studio. I would like to introduce you to our audience. Philip Gamaghelyan is professor of conflict studies at University of San Diego. Philip, mm, you know, there was the first Karabakh war. Armenians won, Azerbaijanis lost. Armenians didn't want to make any compromise. Now we have the result of Second Karabakh War, vice versa. Azerbaijanis won, Armenians lost this war, and now Azerbaijanis don't want to make any compromise. What do you think? Is this not like deja vu? Is this? I know that there was a lot of talk about peace building that failed and which brought to this second war. Don't you think that we're about to witness another period of failure of peace building and another war emerging in 10, 20 or 30 years if compromise is not achieved?
yes, I actually agree with I guess your analysis and the way you are asking the question. I've been pretty consistent personally since I got into peace building field in about 10, 15 years ago now, that the winning the 1991, 1994 First Karabakh War, it was a battle, long battle that was won. The conflict didn't end, it didn't stop. It was very clear that Azerbaijan was preparing for war unless there was a compromise, and that with time the balance of power was shifting. So essentially Armenia had to compromise, and Armenian side, including of course Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians, had to compromise because the alternative would have been worse. It would have been a war with very unpredictable and perhaps even predictable consequences. Currently, I agree. I think we are seeing the reversal of that situation. And currently, the balance is clearly on the side of Azerbaijan. So militarily, Armenian army is destroyed, and politically, in terms of resources, there is a very big imbalance of power. And I can understand from my real political position, Azerbaijan is not looking towards any compromise, essentially trying to impose a victor's peace, in some form. But again, perhaps as of my background, and I was pretty consistent on this before the Second Karabakh War, that Armenians need to compromise. I do have a similar view on current development, because there is a big shift also of what this conflict is. In the past, it was a bilateral conflict somewhat. In the 1990s, the great powers retreated somewhat. They weren't necessarily all that involved. And we were left to our own devices, and we were in a position to decide, essentially, bilaterally what we want to do with our future. We missed that opportunity, unfortunately. I think currently we are in I call it proxy conflict. I don't think we are in a proxy war, similar to, in a way, Ukraine, where apart from Russia-Ukraine war, there is also a proxy Russia-NATO war taking place. We are not at that stage yet. But I think we are in a proxy conflict place. So US is very active trying to wrestle Russia out of the Caucasus and pull it its in direction. Yeah, so EU is very active. Iran is activating, especially if for internal reasons, but also potentially concerned about, for example, Armenia's own territorial integrity being compromised, and what does it mean for Armenia-Iran-Russia relations. So there is a good potential that this can become a proxy war. And I think in a proxy war situation, yes, Armenia is in the weakest position, but if Iran and Russia and US and so on get into the war, then we have Syria-like situation where Azerbaijan is suddenly not looking such a strong party anymore. Yes, it's much stronger than Armenia, but there are other powerful players around. So I think that's potentially strong. So if Armenia is pushed too far into a non-viable solution, where its population's lives are daily compromised, it cannot accept. You have very different, even unequal war, so it can be guerrilla warfare. There are still a lot of other forms of warfare that might prevent kind of imposition of a solution from only winners' perspective. So as before, I believe the Armenians had to compromise. Yes, Azerbaijan won. Yes, Azerbaijan is negotiating from stronger position, but certain degree of compromise is necessary simply from both sides, including from Azerbaijan, to make this livable for Armenians in the south, Armenians in Armenia in general, and Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. Kind of absent that, there is constant warfare in some form that then legitimizes the involvement of third parties. That in turn compromises the security and safety of not only Armenia but also Azerbaijan in the long term.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We're in this situation. It seems to me that. I have a couple other questions. I want to ask you about something that was not part of dialogue during last 30 years before the Second Karabakh War, about the topic of economic connectivity. So before the Second Karabakh War, Azerbaijan was very resistant and didn't want to engage in any topics of or possibility of discussing economic cooperation with Armenia. But now the situation has changed. Azerbaijan is very much interested. Armenia is also in some degree interested. So actually, and then there are like Russia is interested, Turkey. So there's greater powers or regional powers are also very much interested, at least in opening communications, developing trade. So there is this new topic, economic connectivity. How do you see the potential for this topic to add something in this Armenia-Azerbaijan dialogue, something that was missing during the last 30 years?
So I think that's only one piece of a puzzle, and on its own is not going to work. I think it's an extremely important piece of a puzzle. But I need to take a step back and think what I see as a comprehensive peace process should look like. And in the past 30 years, you're right. Supposedly we were moving towards what's now called liberal peace, but there was this version of peace building that, through Madrid principles and so on, we supposedly knew what the solution was, but it was very fragmented. So what you really had, you had official level negotiations in a Minsk group, right? And you had some NGO cooperation. That's it. And full peace process, from that perspective, should involve many other things, including economic connectivity, which was the opposite was happening. There was full isolation, right? So it should involve transitional justice type of measures where there were a lot of war crimes committed, a lot of people displaced, right? So there was nothing really done in a peace process in the past to address this issue. So there were a number of things that were absolutely missing from the peace process, including economic connectivity, that didn't allow these small things such as NGO collaboration and official process to really bring it all together into a peace. Now, I think we are in a similar situation. There is a talk of economic connectivity, but for 2 years it's not moving. Why? Because it's also, in isolation, that's not enough to move the peace forward. Why? An example being, an Armenian end, you have a very serious fear. Yeah, so one or two business people might be interested, but they'll be worried to what they bring Azerbaijani product to Armenia, who is going to buy it, right? So, or their safety might be compromised if they are seen as trading with Azerbaijan. So you cannot do economic connectivity without also addressing issues such as war crime, basic safety of population. So it should come in a package, but it's absolutely an important part of the package. But right now we don't have, again, package. Comprehensive look at peace process. We have official level negotiations about things like demarcation. You have separate conversation about economic connectivity, and that's it. It's just not enough, neither of these, to really bring populations to a point where they will accept a peace deal. And if they don't, they will sabotage, one way or another. So Pashinyan, for example, will not be able to sign off on a peace deal that is not popularly supported. Neither, frankly, I think the Azerbaijani government should be enough popular support and understanding of the peace deal to be able to move that forward. And that's not enough. It's one piece of a puzzle. It's not everything.
Let's having this collective memory of failure of peace building. having this new situation now, with all that experience, with all that, academic knowledge that you have, but also practical knowledge in peace building that you have, what would you recommend to Azerbaijani and Armenian governments, but also Azerbaijani and Armenian societies? Like what needs to be done so this peace process ends up in signing this peace agreement, sustainable peace agreement, and not another failure, another war? What would be your recommendation, coming back with all your personal knowledge, experience, background in this work?
I'm looking at this a bit as I don't see this war as separate from, for example, what's happening in Ukraine or conflicts in Georgia. I think they are all results of the collapse of the Soviet Union, so they are all, in that sense, kind of post-colonial wars. Essentially, an empire, a big state collapsed, and so there is wars over borders and territories, and that's been pretty much after every other empire collapse. You had a very similar situation. So from that perspective, what I think Armenians and Azerbaijanis normally see each other as the main enemy and as the main existential threat. But I think if you take a step out of that, we are also two pretty small post-colonial nations, right, that are surrounded by much bigger powers. And while we are looking at each other as enemy, we actually have much bigger existential threats on the horizon. So I think that's important to recognize, that there is a need to, in some form, find a way to coexist, not to be exploited by third parties. In Azerbaijan right now, there is a lot of focus on, that we don't want the Russian army in internationally recognized Azerbaijan territory, right? That's one way of seeing that, while the conflict continues, you have a great power army standing in your territory. Azerbaijan is not interested in that. But how do you change this situation? So I think the only version is to compromise with each other, where you don't need any involvement of third parties. That's now peace building and why it failed and how to move forward. I think the big issue was this bigger threat perception has been missing, trying to really, yes, we are adversaries, yes, there is a lot of history, painful history that needs to be dealt with, but trying to see that there could be bigger existential threats on our horizon, working from that perspective. And once again, you cannot only fully impose peace, the way Armenians tried to impose peace in the past, as in accept the results of First Karabakh War, recognize, move on. Of course not, because you had hundreds of thousands of displaced, right? You had legitimate grievances from the Azerbaijani side. Now you have legitimate grievances from the Armenian side. You have a security threat to the population of Armenians, either in Karabakh or in the south of Armenia. So you need to have not only official process that's about demarcation, that's important, but you need to have a comprehensive peace process, which is more than the negotiation process we have now, because you need to seriously think about the security of the populations, seriously think about connectivity, seriously think about all the displacement and war crimes and addressing them. So all of this should be part of a peace package, which we don't have now. So it's just not enough what's happening in Brussels or in Moscow. That needs to be expanded. And in that sense, I do see an important role for civil society, not for the sake of it, not because it's a beautiful word, but because you need to expand the peace process beyond only demarcation and railroad going through. You need to think how these populations moving close to each other in proximity gonna not turn back to violence, right? And that requires a lot of work.
But you don't see this happening. It's not. Do you think maybe if peace agreement will be signed, that maybe they think about doing something like this after that?
It's possible, but peace agreements, again, as a theoretician, I can tell most peace agreements fail. Right? So signing a piece of paper doesn't yet bring you to peace. Absolute majority of peace agreements are signed and then they go back to violence at the implementation stage, because they are not, the implementation isn't necessarily fully thought through at the time of signing the peace agreement. And a lot of times, because you are missing such things as reconciliation, or how people gonna be able to coexist in the same space, right? How you deal with trauma, how you deal with fear, hatred that we built in the last 30 years, right? So all of this, if they are not addressed, you sign a paper, people move close to each other, and you go back to violence.
Can I ask you this question then? Like, we have this imagination or this desire, wish that two sides come and with good intentions sign the peace agreement or peace treaty. But how, if you look as a professor of conflict studies, in reality, in the past, how the wars end? Don't they end by imposition of the will of victorious side on the defeated side? Or is this ending always with some kind of mutual agreement?
I mean, there is no magic formula. One way is how you get to the written peace agreement, and that's usually quite realistic negotiations, right? Given the power differentials, given, yes, the results of the war. So all of that absolutely is,
Peace agreements.
absolutely reflected. So yes,
Balance of power.
that balance of power, yes, also geopolitical considerations and all of that, of course, you need to take into consideration the views of other powers. So all of that will reflect in whatever the text of the peace agreement is. But I'm trying to think a step past that, because that peace agreement itself doesn't guarantee peace at all. Again, most of them revert back to, they're not sustainable. They fail on the implementation stage. That's where my point is, that peace agreement can only become sustainable if we have a bigger peace process in mind about including things such as economic connectivity, right? How they will be functioning in reality. So that thinking I see missing. I don't think it's a given that it should be continue to be missing. I think there is a need and space and enough expertise, frankly, built in the last 30 years that we could use to think of this in a bigger picture, as it was the step after that agreement is signed, right? And that can help also shape the peace agreement. Currently, for example, I don't see any provisions being, from what I know, being discussed again about things such as addressing war crimes, addressing psychosocial trauma, water sharing. So there are a lot of issues that will be impacting people's lives after the peace agreement that are not considered, and that will then turn populations against the implementation, and they will sabotage it.
Phil, thank you very much for your time. I hope also this is first but not last time we're talking, and I hope that this peace process, it's very unpredictable how it will end, with another war or with a really peace agreement, peace treaty, and hopefully the sustainable one. But thank you for taking your time, coming to our studio, and I hope to continue our conversations in the future.
Oh, thank you, Amy, for the invitation.
Thanks.